Georgia isn't dead yet, and maybe their quarterback is back on track. First of all, let's just start with how cool the scene was and the environment around Athens. It was their first game in 5 weeks. They hadn't had a home game in 35 days. Their first 3 home games weren't exactly, massive programs, massive games. Yes, the game against Auburn was a good one, but they just hadn't been home in a while, man. It looked like those Georgia fans were coiled, looked like they were ready to roll. And as a result, I do think they had a bit of an impact on the game. The fireworks in the pregame between quarters, lights going on and off. It's just a really cool scene. So the funny thing is while the scene in the pregame was phenomenal, the first quarter wasn't so great for Georgia. Just 21 total yards of offense, 3rd and long. That's, kind of where things were. It wasn't great. Was not great whatsoever. But here, is what I think is fascinating. For as much criticism as Carson Beck and this offense had experienced, it was pretty amazing to me to see the response in the light of early adversity. I mean, they're down 10-0. Things are not going that well. Carson Beck had thrown 12 interceptions in the last 6 games. But now we're moving forward, and it's like, all right, who cares? Let's just throw haymakers. And I thought the offensive plan was excellent from start to finish. Now, would I like to see the receivers creating maybe a little more separation? Perhaps, yeah. But there were a few things that stood out in this game. One, Carson Beck kind of picked up where he left off at Ole Miss. Now, we're going to look and nitpick the performance against Ole Miss, and people will say, well, Carson Beck didn't play well in that game. I would agree that while he didn't play well, he certainly didn't play poorly against Ole Miss. He was getting harassed. Quarterback always gets all the blame and all the credit. This time, the offensive line, he's getting hit over and over and over again. Had an interception, on an interception where he was tipped the line of scrimmage. They couldn't really run the ball. They had drops. The protection issues were paramount. So I think it's easy to look at Carson Beck and say, well, he was the reason why they scored just 10 points in the road trip to Ole Miss. But I don't think it was. There was some progress made in that game, and it carried over into this game as well. And the offense were going against an excellent defense in Tennessee. To have a touchdown drive of 92 yards, a touchdown drive of 87 yards, a second half performance where they really shut the door was impressive. And then the offensive line, that was my big fear, was how would Georgia's offensive line hold up against a defensive line that has shown the ability to take over the game multiple times? Well, they didn't substitute anybody. It's the first time all year in which they chose their 5. They went with their 5, and as a result, 0 sacks. They gave up 5 sacks the week before. Tate Ratledge back at right guard. Monroe Freeling starting at left tackle. The left tackle spot had been a huge problem. And with better protection, you now have better opportunities to dial up a game plan that can keep Tennessee off balance with who they want to try to take away. And guess what? Pick your poison. Because if you want to sell out against one wide receiver and say, hey, you know what, Dominic Lovett, we're not going to allow him to have an impact on this game. Fine. We'll just throw it to the other 5 receivers. 5 different guys and tight ends finished with 50-plus yards. The tight ends by themselves accounted for 10 receptions in the game. And it's been a while since we've seen Georgia really utilize a tight end not named Brock Bowers and feature a tight end not named Brock Bowers. Well, Oscar Delp had his opportunities. Urosic had his. You saw Lawson Lucky at times this year get loose. I think we found out that right now, Georgia, they might not be the Georgia offense of last year with explosiveness and dudes that can take over the game, but they are still, when they get good protection, very capable of methodically carving you up. I think this is the best performance we've seen from Georgia offensively in a while, and I think it's one that can be built on as well. Finally, before we move on to Tennessee, right now, if I told you your life depended on picking a team that will win the national championship, how many of y'all are choosing Georgia? Honestly, honest question. For as much negativity as we've had, I think, in the court of public opinion about Georgia's inconsistent performance, at the end of the day, when you gotta have it, Are they the team that you probably want in your corner? Perhaps. I'm not saying they are or they aren't, but I think a lot of you listening right now would say, all right, if I got to pick a national championship winner and my life depends on it, Georgia feels like a pretty decent bet right now, especially considering what we've seen at times from Ohio State and what we've seen at times from the Oregon Ducks and all the other teams that have been super up and down in the Southeastern Conference.